This is the Trillium Running Podcast, brought to you by Athletics Ontario. I'm your host, John Shep, and here we celebrate Ontario running and bring together voices from across the road and trail running world. We are making strides towards a thriving and inclusive running community because running is for you, for all, for life. So I have the privilege to be a part of this project between Run Ottawa and Athletics Ontario's Trillium Running Podcast. We are calling it 50 Years of Running, and it's because it's the 50th anniversary of Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend. And to celebrate with our first long form episode, we have the new elite coordinator for the Run Ottawa for Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend. Welcome to the Trillium Running Podcast, Stephen Anderson.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be on, and I'm excited to talk about the Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend.
So we start every episode from the beginning. So what got you into running? And then we'll talk about your extremely diverse set of experiences, not just leading up to, but I mean, your resume alone for what you've got right now, you probably have an 8x12 business card, not just the little ones. But I mean, let's start us off at the beginning. Stephen Anderson, what got you into running?
I started running in kindergarten because my dad was a runner, like one of the first runners heading into the running boom, and let's just say I was too small for hockey. I played hockey and all those other sports, but I was far too small and far too unathletic to do all the other ones. But I could run fast and I could beat every other kid in school, and that's why I started to really like it. My dad was big into running in the running room. He can't run anymore because of his knees, but I got into running because he got me into it really, and then I was just really good at it, and it kind of snowballed from there. And I competed throughout elementary school, throughout high school, but I just did it at that point because I was competing and because someone was kind of pushing me into it. And for the team aspect, I didn't really do it because I liked running. It's only when I moved to Ottawa to do my undergraduate degree that I start running again for mental health purposes. And that's kind of where it's got me to my running journey today, is getting back into the sport primarily, like most people do, just for exercise and for mental health. And things snowballed from there and allowed me to qualify for things like Boston, but also participate in the elite side of the sport, which I really love and is my passion.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start out. So you grew up Burlington,
Yeah.
correct?
Burlington, Ontario. Yes. North Burlington at Kilbride Elementary School.
Okay, so you were talking about, I mean, the team aspect in elementary and high school. Talk a little bit about that, because a lot of people who get into running at an older age, I mean, I got into running mid-20s, right? And there's not really the team aspect. It's a singular, and unless you get into the run crew scene, you're really not a part of that team. What about that team element really drew you to the running piece of it?
So it was mostly in high school where that I guess captivated me, because our team was trying to qualify for OFSA, which is, for reference, is the Ontario High School Championships in cross country, and we had three decent guys, myself included, who were always in the top 5 to 15 in the field, and so we were always that close, but we didn't quite have a fourth, right? And we had fourths come and go, and but what I guess the big draw was that 4 or 5 times a week you're meeting with these people and you're spending so much time with them and you're getting to know them as friends and as people, and that element of running, and then going to, I guess this is perhaps the wrong term, but going to war together out on the cross country course or on the track, and really taking those hours and hours of training that you spent together and putting it into a singular purpose, where although yes, winning the race is important, or being in the top 5 is important, but ultimately, without 4 or 5 scorers, depending on the race, you're never going to succeed. And so, although running is, yes, an individual sport, there is that team element to it throughout training. If you're training with training partners, you're always going to be better off typically than if you're training alone, because there's people to push you and motivate you. But also in cross country, when you get out there, it's not just you. You have to think about the other 4, the other 5, and without them, you're not going to succeed as a team and qualify. So, and that was just, we did that 4 years in a row, and it's really great memories thinking back to high school. We did never qualify though. We missed by 1 point a couple times, to teams that now have Olympians on them, so I don't feel so bad.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
probably shouldn't feel that bad, but it's a good, I mean,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. Cross country is a little unique in that sense because it's not like, I mean, you're playing volleyball in high school or hockey in high school or what have you, and you've got sort of one player that can push the entire team forward. You really, because it's an average of all your
yeah,
points, you all really need to be
yeah.
pushing each other at that level.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it makes that very interesting. So, okay, so you take that sort of camaraderie piece and then you start competing collegiately when you go to Ottawa. And
Yeah.
okay,
So
and
I didn't. Sorry, just to correct you, I didn't actually compete collegiately when I was in Ottawa. I only started sort of competing collegiately when I went to law school at University of New Brunswick. In Ottawa, I'd taken 3 years off of running because
oh,
there
interesting.
was not a lot of I wasn't getting the enjoyment from just going out for a run at that time. Like I wanted to do the competing element, and I wasn't quite at that level where I was like could be a collegiate athlete at coming out of high school. And honestly, we didn't take the training too seriously outside of the specific seasons, which is probably why we never qualified. But the way that what I did is I got back into running for my mental health, and then year over year over year, my like it snowball my I guess running abilities began to snowball, and that's ultimately what running is. And I guess success in running is the consistency of it. And if you're able to be consistent, and if you're able to start adding workouts and able to start finding out what works for you and what doesn't, and then getting a coach and all that stuff, that ultimately is the way I improved. And then when I went to law school, I was at a place where I was able to compete collegiately, although albeit near the back. But anyway,
Hey, you know what? You're
yeah,
further ahead than I am. So
yeah,
let's be honest here. And the vast majority
yeah,
of us. So, okay,
mhm,
indulge me a little bit because the mental
yeah,
health side of things is huge for me. I mean,
mhm,
I'm new to the Run Ottawa YouTube page. So
mhm,
for anyone who's first listening, hi, thank you for joining us. But also, I've got 100 episodes on Athletics Ontario's Trillium Running Podcast, many of which are devoted to mental health, many of which I talk about my own story. I got into running coming out of the hospital for disordered eating, and it is what allows me to reframe food. So if I'm having trouble with food, I know that I have to eat because I need to run, right? And so it also gives me the distance from the negative thoughts. And so for me, it's I totally get it. For me, it's sort of 9/10 mental health and maybe 1/10 physical health. Indulge me a little bit. Tell me about your connection to it.
yeah. So I just throughout my first couple of years of university, I struggled with like crippling anxiety. I'm fairly open about that. My biggest fear in the world is vomiting, and so you'd never think that running and vomiting would be a good combo because typically um, that's what it induces it. But what it is, what I think created a lot of that was just the ability to not take this nervous energy and get rid of it and dissipate it, right? And so I was just sitting on it and sitting on it. And if you know me, like I'm a very active person. I like doing things. I like talking. I talk a lot, as you may already realize. And I like discussing things and debating and things like that. And although I was doing those things, I do love all sports, but there was no physical outlet for me. And so getting back into running was a way of getting that physical outlet. And the way I kind of started to then make sure I continued to do that was I signed up for the Ottawa half marathon or whatever it was. Maybe it was the 10K, but at that time during my undergrad, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a goal. I'm going to point to it. I'm not going to be able to run the same way that I did 3 years ago at this point. I'm not, but I'm going to go and I'm going to try and do that. Right. And that gave me that physical outlet. It gave me like that purpose. And then, although I still do struggle with that anxiety from time to time, it's been dissipated by uh, a significant amount. So it's that's kind of the way running kind of helped. I guess it's the mental health story behind the run.
And thank you for sharing. That's, I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
Yeah, no problem.
it's absolutely a powerful tool in order to do that. I wish that we,
Mm-hmm.
the number of people who lose running, I mean, your story is not exceptional, where it's the people lose running after leaving high school or after leaving, whether they compete at cross country or track or what have you, and then they have to refine it when they start to struggle. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad that we're able to talk about it and share that. Look, guys, don't lose it, or guys and girls and everyone,
Mm-hmm.
don't lose it
Yeah.
because it is a tool that because yeah, university, you've got your independence, you're in a different spot,
Hmm.
you're pushing yourself,
Yeah.
and yeah, so to be able to lean on that tool as a part of your toolbox is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. And you, like, my regret is like, I also lost, although the mental health side is far more important, I also lost a lot of abilities, right? Like I went from being a very skinny 4-foot striker. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it means landing, I guess, on the front of your foot or the ball of your foot, to a slow heel foot striker at the start, which means landing on your heel. And obviously, like that changes your speed drastically, right? And it took me a couple of years to get back to the point where I was even getting back in the same technical mindset of running, which is huge, by the way, for people who are trying to improve their speed. Is you have to run a lot, but you also have to work on your technique. But it also it put me in, it took away those abilities. So it took me years to get back to a place where I was. And only it was a year or two ago where I started to eclipse high school PBs, like in the middle distances, the 800, 1500, things like that. So it took a long time to get back to that point.
Now, so you talked about undergrad in
Hmm.
Ottawa and then
Yeah.
law school in New Brunswick.
Hmm.
When was it when you flipped from being a runner to being, you've got sort of this whole
Yeah.
cast of pieces to your running. You're a
Hmm.
run coach,
Yeah.
you're an agent, you're
Hmm.
a race director, you've organized Fredericton Stride, which is a run crew. Like
Yeah.
you've got all of these different elements. When did that switch flipped? And I guess the bigger question is why?
Yeah. Great question. I always wanted to work in sports. But as being not very good at hockey or things like that, I'm a big Leafs fan, for example, but there was no way I was ever going to play and let alone work for a team like that or something like that. So that was off the table. And so I was working at Environment Canada at the time, and Dylan Wykes moved back to Ottawa. And for those of you who don't know, he's the former elite athlete coordinator who's provided me a lot of guidance. And he restarted his mile to marathon chapter in Ottawa. And I immediately signed up for that.
That
And
was a
that's kind of
coaching
when
or run crew?
it's like personal coaching, but they also have a run crew, right? So
Okay.
they do, I don't know what they're doing now, but at the time it was 2 workouts a week. So it was Wednesday night or whatever, and then Saturday night. And so I would go out to that and provide a lot of camaraderie and things like that. And that's when I realized that I wanted to, like, talking with Dylan, I guess, more and more about the sport, um, and where there's gaps in Canadian sport. I was already a fan of track and field. I watched the Diamond Leagues on the weekends, and always. But why is, like, all loved running, but why is it not a mainstream sport? And that got me thinking more and more, and meeting more elite athletes, and that brought me into the agent side of things. Is okay, I want to work in sports. I'm I'm working at the government now, but I want to do something that I'm really going to love. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to go to law school for sure because I need more than just my undergraduate arts degree. But I need more than
You know
that. And
what?
so,
Things they don't tell you in high
yeah,
school. That arts
yeah,
degree, I mean, you know what you can do with it? You can go to law school, you can go to
yeah,
teachers college, you can operate a podcast like I am currently. So
yeah, there you go. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. Like, I took history and political science at University of Ottawa, and I loved it. And I love the courses, and like it's so much more interesting than going to law school. But you'd certainly need most people need the next step.
yeah, you need to
And you could
do the
also do
law
a
school,
master's
the
or a
teachers
PhD. But yeah,
college. Yeah. Go to
yeah,
a college, right? Go to deal with the trades, that sort of
mhm.
deal.
Yeah, most people need a next step after doing that. And so my next step was law school, and I realized pretty quickly that law, and it was sad leaving Ottawa and leaving Dylan's group, but I realized pretty quickly that law wasn't something I was like completely passionate about. I didn't want to like work in a courtroom or go work 20 hours a day doing something that I didn't really love. And so the more I met with athletes and the more I talked with different coaches, the more the need came to me that there needed to be an agent presence in Canada. So, for those of you who don't know, the most Olympic athletes on the track and field scene have agents. The agent's job is threefold. It's to first get athletes entered into meets. So you don't just sign up for the Diamond League on race roster. You have to go through and lead athlete coordinator, and you have to negotiate with them an appearance fee, etc. and travel, all of those other things. The second is looking for athlete sponsorships. That's like New Balance or Asics or, you know, those running shoe brands, or it's like different companies. So Dairy Farmers of
Aluminum. I
Ontario, for
mean, I
example,
think,
sponsors some athletes. Yeah.
yeah, Michael Phelps had the aluminum foil company.
Yeah, exactly.
So it
Exactly.
can be tangential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the third is just providing general advice. And the thing around that is the point system at World Athletics, which we don't need to get into, but is very, very complex. And I feel like you need a PhD to figure that out. But
or go to law school.
Yeah. Anyway, so those are kind of the 3 points behind like the 3 things the agent does. And for the longest time, you needed to go to the US in order to get an agent. And by that, I mean, there's more than 3 or 4, but there's 3 or 4 big agencies in the US who do track and field. And most Canadian athletes had to go there. And some of the stuff I was hearing are, these agents don't really care about me. They care about the Americans. It's so much harder for a Canadian to get into these meets, blah, blah, blah. And so different themes like that kept reappearing and reappearing, especially as I was kind of meeting with more athletes and chatting with Dylan about his work at the race weekend and things like that. And that's why I decided to go and take the exam at World Athletics and become an agent.
No, sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
So
why no Canadian agents? I mean, we clearly had Canadian athletes. We have really exceptional Canadian athletes. Why do you think no Canadian agents?
Because, there's high barriers to entry for the agent field. Like there's, especially now under new regulations this year, but there's a high upfront cost to it. There's
like in order to do the exams, you mean?
Yeah. Like you have to apply, then you have to be accepted. Now there's like it's a few $1,000s to pay to do the exam / get accredited. Then it's more money to get insurance on top of that, and it's just not a very profitable industry, especially in the first. And I'm learning this. It's not very, especially in the first 1 to 5 years. It's not very profitable because you have to build a stable of athletes and build networks with shoe companies and build your Rolodex with people across the globe, right? And it's something I think I'm doing a good job. I don't know, but I think I'm doing a good job. But I'm trying to reach out to these different people and build that network. And I'm at this point where it's slowly starting to come together. But nobody else is in this space because it's so difficult to do. So there was one guy who used to do it, Chris McCashew, who's provided me some guidance. He's been very nice about that. But ultimately, there's been no one else doing it. So people have gone to the US where they have these big agencies who have all these contacts already. And it's just how the system has worked. And ultimately, if you're Andre de Grasse, it doesn't really matter who you go to. But if you're an athlete who may be making the Olympics, but maybe not making the Olympic final, it's very hard to get into these meets. And what these bigger agents can do is they can say, okay, you can take XYZ athlete in your field that I have that are big names, but you also have to take ABC.
Yeah.
Right? And then so that's how they can continue to, I guess, monopolize the system. And so it's like that's kind of the barriers to entry that make it so difficult for new agents. But it's great that there's a guy in Japan, Brett Larner, who's Canadian, but he operates in Japan. He's always helped out Canadians. And so I'm learning from him and different people like that about how we can kind of continue to grow this ability for Canadians to work for Canadians and things like that. So
I love that.
That's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, you know, I appreciate it. I mean, if we're going to nerd out about running, we may as well nerd out about running on a running podcast. So,
yeah.
Okay. So you take that love for the sport, you've got your agency, you've got the work that you're doing out in New Brunswick.
Yeah.
What brought you back to Ottawa then?
So the Ottawa Marathon is great. As I mentioned, it was the first race I did coming back from, that Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend is great. And coming back, it was my first race after starting to run again after high school. And so there's fond memories there. But it was ultimately Dylan Wykes who allowed me to get involved again. About 3 iterations of the race ago, he asked me to help him out as assistant elite athlete coordinator because it's a lot of work just for one person. And we have of course, Africans coming in. We have some Europeans. We have Americans. We got Canadians. We have two separate elite fields. We have the 10K and the marathon, and so it's a huge event to put on.
Yeah, I remember talking with him about it. It was either a year ago or 2 years ago when we had him and Ian Fraser on the podcast, and it was like even things like getting visas, getting passports, rental cars, like the minutia of what he had to consider when bringing in elite athletes was just mind blowing to me.
Yeah, the law element has really helped with the visas. I took an immigration law course, and so I think I have a good understanding of how the visa process works now. And it's something that we are still ironing out, but it's very complicated. But yeah, there's lots of stuff that goes on, especially at the event. And what me coming into town is because I still live in New Brunswick while my partner and she finishes her PhD, is by coming in from out of town, I was able to stay at the hotel and operate with the athletes. It allowed Dylan to go home to his family at night. And then he'd come back and we'd both operate during the day. So he got me really involved. And then when as Mile to Marathon has continued to grow for him, he ultimately just does. This is just a lot of work, right? And it's something that I'm super passionate about, and I think it's going to help me network with different athletes and different agents moving forward. And ultimately for him, it's Mile to Marathon is really, and I'm putting words in his mouth, but it's ultimately his passion, and working with the everyday athlete, what some people describe as the weekend warriors, really
the recreational runners, yeah. And it's interesting. I had this thought when I was, and I've had, again, 100 conversations, many of which I've had with elite runners or coaches or what have you. And I find many of them have multifaceted relationships with running. So to your point, Dylan, right? He was the elite coordinator. He was an elite runner. He was a coach. But what ends up, and I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, part of that is around what you're talking about with the agent piece, is because none of those buckets can really fulfill a full-time, they can for hours, but full-time salary, you kind of have to piece together a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there. And when one of them takes off, you're kind of left there, as you sort of suggesting Dylan did, you're left there being like, okay, this one thing is really taking off. I need to carve out the other pieces. And so I'm thinking about you, right? You've got your race directing, you've got your agent, you've got now the elite coordinator. One of those is bound to take off as well. But I wonder if that's related to the reason why you need the agents in Canada.
Yeah, that's certainly a good point. Like I think the agent side thing is slowly taking off, and I could ultimately turn it in, like I could be working on it 75 hours a week, the agent piece, but it doesn't pay 75 hours a week. So doing
not yet.
No, not yet. But doing the thing like working with the Ottawa Marathon, which is a fantastic race organization, as well as doing some personal coaching in Fredericton and setting up our Fredericton Stride group, which is a not-for-profit. Like I don't make any money from that. Those are just different pieces to help keep me engaged in different levels of the community, because I believe in order to be a good agent, in order to be a good elite athlete coordinator, in order to be a good coach, in order to be a good runner, you need to understand all elements of, I guess, running in this country, right? And so going back to the elite program, my number one goal is how can we relate this elite program to your everyday runner, right? Because even for me, I can obviously not run a 2:06 marathon. I've run, I think, a decent marathon, 2:40, but I've never run a 2:06 marathon, right? And so how do we take this person who's coming to us from Kenya, or how do we take even like the likes of Mohamed and Cam Levins, who joined us for the 10K last year, and make them relatable to the everyday runner? How do we tell their stories? And that's ultimately how I think we can like cross intersect all those different elements. Is you need to understand the everyday runner. You need to understand what, I guess, makes them tick, what their interest level is in the elite side of the sport, in order for the elite side of the sport to be meaningful. Because ultimately, these are the ambassadors for the race. These people like Mo and like Cam, these are who the sponsors are paying. This is what the sponsors are paying for, because they want to see these people on our race start. They want to see you cover them. They want to see the reels on Instagram. They want to see people tuning into live stream. They want to see people beside the road looking at all the sponsorships as they go by, things like that. And so how do we relate these people back to the everyday runner, to have that everyday runner come out and learn about the sport and learn more about the elite side of sport? How do we want them to watch the Olympics? We want them to watch the Diamond League, things like that. And the more people become interested in like how running works, the more the elites are going to feel supported in Canada, the better success I'm going to have as an agent, because the more sponsors will be interested in sponsoring, right? And so, although this all sounds very selfish, I think in order to grow the sport in Canada, we have more people run in Canada than play hockey, right? More people run in Canada than do anything. The number of people who go into your local sports store and buy running shoes is more than what any other people do, right? And what any other sport. What we don't realize is that these are the audience for us as the Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend. The audience for me as an agent. How do we relate to these people, and how do we relate to our everyday runner? And that's where there's a big gap. And so that's, I guess, the goal. Not to go off on another long tangent, but that's the goal of the goal of the race director, or even Dylan's goal, is to how to bridge the elite community, who are his coaches, with the everyday runner. And I think he's done a really good job of that. And I hope we can kind of emulate that similar feeling at the Ottawa Marathon this year.
But, a lot of great ideas. And it made me think two things. It made me think about the word love. And so how, I guess, from your perspective, being connected both to the recreational and the elite, what do you think, and this is probably a very large answer, some of which you just covered a little bit, but what do you think it's going to take for recreational runners, for the recreational audience, to fall in love with the elites?
Well, I think we see it a little bit with people like Ben Flanagan and Cam Levins and Natasha Wodak. And there's Andre DeGrasse, right? I can list a whole bunch who have really made that connection. And there's social media elements to it, but ultimately it's your ability to communicate, or the elite's ability to communicate and express their feelings that are traditional feelings that everybody has, right? Everybody has a bad race. Everybody has bad runs. Most people get injured, right? And these are all different things that is a shared experience between all runners. And I think it's Tim Hutchings or Rob Walker, one of our great commentators at the Ottawa or Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend, who said running is the truly democratic experience. In running, the person at the back of the pack is running the same course as the person at the front, right? They're going to have the same feeling. Although one may be running 2 hours and 5 minutes, one may be running 6 hours and 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. They have the same feeling. And it's how those elite athletes can communicate those feelings, whether it's in interviews or through social media or through different appearances that they do for us, is really, I think, how we begin to break down those barriers. And also understanding that everybody is doing the same thing. Everybody has the same goal, and that's to go out there and do their best to set the goal their goal that they want to achieve. So that's kind of, I think, how we start. But it's very, as you said, it's a very big conversation. And ultimately, the more that the elite athlete can put themselves out there and make themselves relatable is going to be better for them, for their livelihood as well, because sponsors will be more interested in working with them.
And then thank you. And I guess the second piece, and we'll sort of bring it full circle to the wonderful world of Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
As you've done it as a runner, you've been on the organization side. What's going to make anyone fall in love with Tamarack Ottawa Race Weekend?
First of all, the city is beautiful. So I lived in the city for 7 years. It's one of the best cities in Canada, let alone the world. Very active community. The winters can be a little harsh. The summers can be a little humid, but the community is so active. There's excellent active transportation options. There's excellent running routes, all those different kind of things, and that's ultimately like what the city provides. So the city, it's just a great spot to visit and a great spot to come and run a marathon and then see the museums and the Parliament buildings, and the Ottawa River, the Rideau Canal, everything that comes along with the Ottawa experience. Second of all, it's the largest race weekend in the country, and it's just great to run alongside thousands and thousands of people who are coming from all walks of running, whether it's the elites and like Cam Levins, Mohamed, Natasha Wodak, and Lindy Elmore at the front of the pack, but also the people you're going to be competing side by side with. And regardless of the race, there's always going to be people around you, and it's worthwhile. And finally, the race organization is second to none. Run Ottawa does an amazing job. So I obviously only focus on the elite athletes in my role, but they do an amazing job making sure every participant feels wanted. Every participant, there's never any issues with the participant experience. The medals are gorgeous, the t-shirts are gorgeous, and so things like that are just the amazing things that Run Ottawa does that should make this your destination race.
Love it. Great commercial. We'll splice that and put it the other ones, but. You know what, Stephen?
I deserve a bonus for that.
Yeah, there you go. Anyone in Run Ottawa listening to Stephen, he's on board. Well, you know what? I very much appreciate you taking the time, and again, looking forward to Run Ottawa's the rest of this series. Obviously, I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be the one doing it, but I'm looking forward to catching up with you face to face at some point. But I can't have you leave without doing our stride questions, which for the Trillium Running Podcast are rapid fire questions to end off on a good note. So, question 1, what does running mean to you, Stephen Anderson?
Health, freedom, success.
Love it. Question 2, we already know what your favorite race in Ontario is, so that's kind of cheating, but what's your favorite place to run?
In Ottawa, my favorite race or favorite place to run, is along the Rideau Canal. It's a staple up through the Arboretum. But in Ontario, I'm sorry, Ottawa, it's got to be Dundas Valley along the rail trail. It's so great in there. Unfortunately, sometimes it's paid for parking, but otherwise, there's so many trail options. Lots of elevation change to make you fit. That's got to be it.
Yeah, Dundas Valley Conservation Area out in Hamilton Way, and I mean, I'm going to be running the Sulphur Springs 100 miler in that area. We've got a lot. Thank you kindly. And we've got the Happy Trails Racing does a lot of events out there. It's just, absolutely gorgeous. Okay. Question 3. What's the best book you've recently read or podcast you've recently listened to?
So the best, I read it probably 6 months to a year ago, but the best running book I've read is Run the World by Becky Wade. Becky Wade's an American. It's Becky Wade Firth now, but Becky Wade, she's an American distance runner. She hasn't been on the circuit for a little bit. She just had her child, but when she graduated from college, she was NCAA All-American, but she took this project on, this research grant to go around the world and experience all these different running cultures. And it's an amazing read. It's a decently fast read, and she actually ran at the Toronto Waterfront Marathon a few years ago, and great book. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, definitely got to pick that up. Okay. Question 4. What's your best advice for a new runner?
Be consistent at it, but don't do too much too soon.
Sage advice. Well, Stephen, like I said, I've appreciated you taking the time. Looking forward to the rest of the Run Ottawa series, the 50 years of running and collaboration with us at the Trillium Running Podcast. But I can't have you leave without answering our final question. What was one good thing about your day?
That's a great question. I went for a run this morning. The weather was awful. I had 45 kilometer-an-hour winds in my face, but I got out the door, greatly enjoyed it. I always try and meet up with a running partner, and I did. We had great conversations about Star Wars and what Star Wars should do, and made the time go by really fast and all that stuff, despite the bad weather. So that's the best part of my day so far.
Bad weather, good run, great company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Stephen, thank you for taking the time. We'll put your social media information in the show notes, but looking forward to cross paths pretty soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was good chatting.
Thank you to Tamarack Homes and Athletics Ontario for helping us bring this video and podcast series to you. Join Tamarack Homes in celebrating the 50th anniversary of Ottawa Race Weekend. Register now at runottawa.ca. And don't forget to visit athleticsontario.ca or check out the show notes to become a Road and Trail member and discover all of Athletics Ontario's amazing benefits, including discount codes to some of your favorite or soon-to-be favorite Ontario races.